Marshall received his MA in art history from Penn State University, and from 1998 to 2002, he was assistant curator at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. He has organized many exhibitions, most recently Bold Strokes, California Watercolors, The Abstract Impulse, 50 Years of Abstraction at the National Academy, and most recently, George Tucker, a retrospective. Marshall has written and lectured on U.S. art of the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, and is currently completing his doctoral dissertation on the artist John Ferren at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. The title of his talk today is Identity Crisis: John Ferren's Early Transnationalism.
Thank you, Mary Kate, for that introduction and for the invitation to participate in this symposium and the technical assistance that you provided yesterday. Thank you also to the Fundación Cisneros, Linda Nettleson, Mary Sue Sweeney-Price, and the entire staff here at the Newark Museum who have made today possible. It's really wonderful to be able to present material on John Ferren's work within the context of artistic exchange, not only because this has been a topic of research for me for the last 5 years and the subject of my dissertation, but more importantly because Ferren played an active role in the development of abstraction during the 1930s and has yet to be fully examined. While the exhibition focuses primarily on the exchanges between artists of North and South America of the 1920s to the 1950s, certainly Europe could also be considered as the third point in what was often a triangular relationship between continents. Ferren's role in helping to codify the language of abstraction was one that was based in Paris and transmitted to New York, but with some indirect links to South America through friendships with artists who were living in Paris in the 1930s. Ferren became transnational, which initially helped him gain early artistic success, but marginalized him after his permanent return to the US. This paper is an examination of just a few years of Ferren's career, microhistory to be sure, and a brief look at his transnationality within the context of artistic experimentation and change that was occurring in the 1930s. John Ferren had an extraordinary life. Most artists are lucky to participate in one avant-garde movement. Ferren participated in two: Paris in the 1930s and New York in the 1950s. He was born in Oregon in 1905 and moved with his family to Los Angeles, where he grew up. Feeling unhappy and dissatisfied with LA, Ferren moved to the much more cosmopolitan San Francisco after high school. There he worked for the telephone company as an engineer and, on a whim, began to sculpt with modeling clay, creating busts and figures such as this one. He undertook an apprenticeship with a stone carver and began to meet artists in the city such as Yun Ji, who in turn exposed him to the work of Cézanne and modernist ideas. Ferren was a slow convert to modernism, however, and he noted in his diary in 1927, quote, "The majority of contemporary painting cannot touch me, although I deeply appreciate a few of the old masters, Rembrandt, Velázquez, El Greco, Leonardo," end quote. Ferren left San Francisco for Europe in 1929, landing in Saint-Tropez, and by chance he met a group of American students of Hans Hofmann that included Václav Vitlichil, Glenn Wessels, and Fred Hauck. This experience was transformative and reiterated his earlier encounter with modernist tendencies. Saint-Tropez was also where Ferren met the woman who would become his first wife, Laurie Ortiz de Zarate. Ferren returned briefly to the US, but had been so taken with Europe, and especially the young Ortiz de Zarate, that he was soon on his way back, arriving in Paris in early 1931. Artistically speaking, his timing could not have been better, as his return coincided with the recent dissolution of two groups of abstract artists, Cercle et Carré and Art Concret, which subsequently led to the formation of the longer-lived and more ideologically solid Abstraction Création. Newly arrived, Ferren immediately began assimilating various abstract styles. He recognized the moment as an opportunity for him to shed his American identity and consciously position himself in a transnational context. It's important to understand Ferren's assimilation of European modernism for three primary reasons. For one, it obviously leads to a greater understanding of the artist's oeuvre. On a formal level, it provides a revealing example of how Americans adopted and adapted lessons learned in Europe. Finally, it serves as a case study in transnationalism. Having come from California, a relative latecomer to the party of modernism, Ferren had some catching up to do, and he did so with alacrity. His work from this period, including these two paintings, is reminiscent of Americans Carl Halty, Wittlichil, and others in Europe at the time. Many factors played a role in Ferren's transnational development. As Cecilia de Torres points out in her essay in the catalog, he had entry into Spanish-speaking groups in Paris, primarily through his wife and her father, the Chilean artist Manuel Ortiz de Zarate. He was soon introduced to Joaquin Torres Garcia, with whom Ferren became quite friendly. Torres Garcia exerted a strong formal influence on Ferren beginning in 1932, as these two paintings reveal. It was likely Torres Garcia who invited Ferren to exhibit in a group show at the Galerie Zac that same year. This was Ferren's first entree into the Parisian art world. However, Wassily Kandinsky soon supplanted Torres Garcia as Ferren's chief influence and served as the next phase in his march toward developing a mature artistic style. By 1933, and illustrated in these two works, his work incorporated similar floating, hard-edged geometric shapes as Kandinsky's. Art historian Gail Levin and others have noted Ferren's reliance on Kandinsky's forms, and the American artist even mentions seeing his work in his diary. I should stress here that beyond his mere adoption of certain stylistic modes, Ferren also had a firm grasp on many of the underlying intellectual concepts surrounding abstraction at the time. In her introductory essay to the catalog, Mary Kate articulates well the conceptual commonalities between European and North and South American art of the 1930s and the suspicious reception it received, especially in North America. For American and European artists, abstract artists alike, art was intended to connect with the populace at large and provide a unifying force. Ferren understood this, and his adoption of various styles was not simply rote imitation, but a desire to engage more fully with the work, and in particular, what it stood for. In an undated and unpublished manuscript from circa 1934 titled "To the Critics of Abstract Art," Ferren wrote, quote, "In abstract painting, from the simple geometric square forms of Kandinsky and Mondrian to the complex organic form in the paintings of Elion and Ferren, the materials used are the simple communal forms apparent in everyday life. The carpenter or mechanic or bookkeeper could grasp and understand these forms and thus be rendered sensitive to the tension between them and thus experience art," end quote.